Earth's hidden supercarrier appeared and stunned the galaxy. The sulfur frost on the moon Pyro's 7 split along a 12-kilometer seam. A mountain of gray steel rose out of the core, scattering shattered rock into the dark. Flight Overseer Nivax watched his tactical monitor turn bright red as the massive object blocked out the local star. The registry logs on his console flickered, trying to catalog a shape that was 14 kilometers long. No distress signals, no tactical maneuvers, no retreat. The emergency frequency stayed completely quiet as 3,000 automated interceptors slid from the gray hull's forward bay doors. Nivax hit the fleet broadcast button, his hands shaking against the metal frame of his deck console. The Empire thought they were measuring a colony. They were measuring their own grave. Stay close to see how the lines fell. 72 hours earlier, the air inside the high war chamber of Hexar Prime smelled of heavy ammonia filters and cold stone. Overwarlord Vorathzane stood before the central holographic map, with his scaled arms crossed tightly over his silver plate. He looked down at the tiny green indicator that marked the human border sector. The Rishkari Dominion had held its seat on the High Council for 9,000 cycles, and their military database had never recorded a statistical loss. The human workforce has occupied this zone for exactly 3 centuries, Vorathzane said to his staff. His voice was a heavy rattle that filled the volcanic rock room. Under the terms of the treaty, their security force is limited to 84 small cutters. They possess 0 capital hulls and 0 heavy weapons. The Council has ordered their fuel depots nationalized. We deploy 75 capital ships to take the facilities by force. Resistance is mathematically impossible. Nivax signed the deployment logistics order, routing the 75 warships toward the frozen mining colonies. The database categorized the local population as Tier 3 logistics workers who always complied with imperial administrative decrees. Across the sector, on the weathered human monitoring station Bastion 9, the air smelled of stale filter coffee and hot copper wire. Commander Gideon Stark sat at a metal desk with a stained wool coat pulled tight around his broad shoulders. He held a scratched steel sliding caliper in his hand, using the narrow metal rule to measure the wear on an old valve guide. The main threat monitor flashed red as 75 capital warships dropped out of slipspace, forming an iron wall around the moon Pyros 7. Stark did not look up from his caliper. He adjusted the thumbscrew on the tool, checking the marks against a handwritten logbook. The desk console beeped, and the wide, scaled face of Vorathzane filled the communication screen. "Commander Stark," the warlord said through the electronic translator, "your sector is under Imperial administration. You have exactly 5 minutes to disable your orbital grid and order your 84 cutters to anchor. If you resist, your infrastructure will become slag." Stark set the caliper down beside his coffee mug. He leaned forward, his tobacco-stained fingers locking together over his logs. "Warlord," Stark said, his gravelly voice flat and steady, "I see your deployment pattern on my screen. You have clustered your battleships within 12,000 kilometers of our primary mining plants to establish an orbital lock. I strongly advise you to pull your line back by at least 2 astronomical units." Vorathzane let out a sharp hiss of amusement from his lower mandibles. "You have 84 patrol cutters that do not carry standard plasma cannons. You are looking at the oldest navy in known space, and you are simply waiting for the inevitable." The warlord cut the transmission before Stark could answer. On the flagship bridge, Nivax turned to his command display to monitor the descent vectors. "Bring all 75 hulls into close orbital lock," Nivax ordered the helmsman. "Target the primary planetary grids." The red warships moved closer together as they sank into the upper gravity well of the moon, adjusting their thrusters to cover the colony's industrial zones. Nivax pulled up the local orbital scan to verify the human defense positions. "Overseer," Nivax said, turning toward the warlord's station, "the human cutters are not scattering. They are moving into parallel lines along our flanks. They are maintaining their patrol vectors despite an 18-to-1 material disadvantage." Vorathzane tapped his claw against his silver battle plate. "They have no capital ships to counter our weight. Ignore them and finalize the lock." Nivax checked the manifest records on his terminal. A small text alert flashed at the bottom of the old colony logs, showing a permanent 12% mineral mass discrepancy over 40 consecutive cycles. The Imperial Trade Bureau had archived it years ago as frontier waste from basic human refinery errors. On the surface of Bastion 9, Tactical Coordinator Diana Cross watched the red icons cluster inside the moon's gravity pocket. "They are in position, Commander," she said quietly. "All 75 targets have cleared the safety line." Stark picked up his steel caliper again, sliding the rule open and shut. Send the code to the core, he said. Tell Nathaniel to clear the staging ground. 3 miles beneath the thick sulfurized sheets of Pyros 7, foundry engineer Nathaniel Ward stood inside a vaulted stone junction chamber. The raw rock walls vibrated with the deep hum of 40-year-old heavy mining drills. A single red indicator bulb flickered on the primary control frame over his head. Ward gripped a heavy steel breaker switch mounted directly into the granite floor. He did not look at the data displays. He pulled the metal lever down with both hands, locking it into the baseline terminal. 400 internal plasma tethers fired simultaneously through the subterranean core of the world. On the flag bridge of the Iron Sovereign, the primary tactical board exploded into amber warning alerts. The deck lurched violently, throwing 2 helmsmen against the forward console frames. "Report," Vorathzane roared, gripping the edge of the central map table as his amber compound eyes widened. Did the humans trigger an orbital defense battery? Nivax fought to clear the status alarms on his terminal, his claws hitting the manual override keys. "The planetary mass indicators for Pyros 7 are dropping," he shouted. "The sulfur crust in Sector 12 is breaking apart. We are detecting a military reactor signature coming from inside the moon's core." Vorathzane sneered, his scales flattening against his neck. "A suicide mine. Bring the forward shields to maximum capacity." "It is not a mine," Nivax screamed as the hull sensors fed the new visual feed onto the main screen. "The core isn't blowing up, it is rising." The ice broke, the core rose, the line died. Millions of tons of frozen yellow rock erupted into the void as the sulfur ice crust shattered entirely. Out of the bleeding core of the world rose a mountain of unpolished gray steel, 14 kilometers long from its rear thruster blocks to its blunt forward prow. The massive vessel carried no golden crests, no imperial decorations, and no faction flags. It bore only the plain white block letters of its registry name across the forward hangar bay, SS Leviathan. The unlisted Supercarrier did not fire standard plasma cannons. Its entire 15-kilometer structural spine operated as a single hypervelocity mass driver, powered directly by the thermal energy of the moon's exposed core. Before the Rashkari battleships could break their tight orbital locks, the SS Leviathan opened its primary ventral bays. 3,000 automated kinetic interceptors flooded the narrow corridor between the moon and the Imperial fleet like a dark iron swarm. The sky became a grid of white-hot rail trajectories. The high-velocity slugs traveled at 2% the speed of light, punching straight through the silver battle plate of the Rashkari line before the shields could register the physical impacts. 4 capital battleships were split clean through their engine blocks in the first 8 seconds of the launch. Nivax watched his tactical screen turn entirely red as the flagship's internal gravity stabilizers gave way. The close-range lock that Vorathzane had ordered trapped the fleet against the Supercarrier's broadside, leaving them no room to pivot or escape into deep space. Hulls collided in the dark as thrusters failed, their internal fuel stores lighting up the debris field in brief, white flashes. By minute 14 of the engagement, the Rashkari third subjugation line was gone. 71 capital ships drifted as fractured, burning titanium scrap around the broken remnants of the moon. The emergency frequency crackled to life across the ruined sector. Commander Stark's voice came through the static of Nivax's secondary console, flat, slow, and unhurried. "We didn't design a navy to challenge your borders," Stark said into the open channel. "We built a solution to remove them." An hour later, the silence returned to the industrial border zone. On the bridge of the SS Leviathan, Gideon Stark stood by the thick glass viewport, looking out at the cold rings of drifting metal. The air smelled of burnt engine grease and recycled oxygen. He pulled the scratched steel caliper from his coat pocket, wiped a smudge of oil from the rule, and slid it back into the wool lining. A single Imperial escape pod drifted through the outer edge of the wreckage, its emergency beacon broadcasting raw survival telemetry back to the High Council. Inside the pod, Flight Overseer Nivax sat in the dim emergency light, his amber eyes fixed on the display window. The massive gray supercarrier turned slowly away from the debris field, its engines igniting with a pale blue glow as it pointed its prow toward the galactic core. The unlisted metal hull slid into the dark, vanishing from the scanner arrays as the regional defense cutters resumed their quiet patrol lines. Nivax watched the gray shadow disappear. He did not stop the transmission. The console logged the empty space where a fleet had been.